A nation's nuclear-powered ballistic missile-carrying submarines, or SSBNs for short, are silent, deadly, and highly efficient. Their blueprints, designs, and technical capabilities are very closely guarded by a country's military, and estimating their whereabouts or performance numbers can be incredibly tricky. But satellite photos have shown that China's Navy, commonly known as the People's Liberation Army Navy, is rapidly expanding its naval fleet, adding new and more advanced submarines that are capable of destroying the United States in 30 seconds. Today we're taking a look at their terrifying capabilities, and we'll also answer one extremely important question: can China catch up to the United States with its submarine technology? The People's Liberation Army Navy cannot be taken lightly. David Ochmanek, a former senior Defense Department official who helps the Pentagon run war games, said that if a war between China and Taiwan broke out, the United States might be helpless to protect it. And it isn't because the US military lack funds, military personnel, or advanced technology. A war game is a simulated military conflict in which two or more countries test their tactical and militaristic capabilities. New simulations and strategies are tested out, and personnel are tasked with defending their fleets against foreign attackers. In one such exercise, with America as Team Blue and China as Team Red, Ochmanek noted that Taiwan's air force was wiped out within minutes. The US air base across the Pacific Ocean came under heavy attack, and American aircraft and warships were repelled by China's long-range missiles. It was a massacre. But this wasn't possible 20 years ago. Back then, China had no chance of challenging the US in the Taiwan Strait. The Pentagon could rely on the US military's air superiority, as well as move aircraft carriers close to Taiwan's east coast, to successfully challenge them. But times have changed. Over the last 20 years, China's name has become synonymous with economic development, upward mobility, and relentless growth. In the last 10 years alone, China has contributed more than 40% to the global economic growth, whereas the United States has only contributed 22%. The more China prospered, the more it invested into new naval ships, warplanes, and other more technologically advanced weapons. But most of all, their vast arsenal of ballistic and cruise missiles are designed to undermine and overcome the US military's sea and air capabilities. Their economy may be slowing right now, but most world economists believe that this will be short-lived. And it seems that tensions between the US and China are already rising at an alarming rate. On August 6, 2023, news broke that Chinese and Russian naval forces had arrived very close to the coast of Alaska. They were promptly shadowed by a P-8 Poseidon aircraft and 4 US destroyers. However, they didn't linger near the coast too long, so there was no need for alarm. Both the Russian Defense Ministry and Chinese Embassy said that this was part of a routine drill, as part of an annual cooperation between the Chinese and Russian militaries. Over the last decade, US intelligence analysts have been warning that China's military strength was progressing frighteningly fast. They also warned that because of China's increasing military growth, the United States' superiority in the Pacific was slowly diminishing. Perhaps now, with all this evidence before them, the Pentagon understands the gravity of the situation. But what exactly has the People's Liberation Army Navy, or simply the People's Navy, achieved in the last 20 years? The Type 094 submarine. Under the watchful eye of chief designer Zhang Jinlin, the Type 094 ballistic missile submarine was commissioned by the People's Navy in 2007. Jinlin passed away on January 9, 2023, but his legacy endures. During his lifetime, the People's Navy commissioned 5 additional Type 094 submarines, bringing the total to 6 in active service. According to current estimates, each Type 094 submarine cost $750 million to build. As a direct successor to the Type 092, which was the first SSBN deployed by the People's Navy in 1987, the Type 094 underscores China's commitment to naval innovation and military power. In late 2006, a satellite photograph revealed that one of the Type 094s was stationed at the Zhaopindao submarine base. The People's Navy officially deployed it by 2007, and from then, the Type 094's fleet size has grown from 1 to 6 fully operational SSBNs by 2020. But in late 2015, China did something it had never done before. US military officials confirmed that the People's Navy for the first time had deployed a Type 094 SSBN on a nuclear deterrence patrol. A nuclear deterrence patrol is when a country makes clear that they have the technology and weaponry to respond to a nuclear threat. This means that if another country decided to fire a nuclear-powered weapon at China, they would respond in kind. However, these protocols are a critical component of a country's nuclear strategy. They emphasize the importance of maintaining a responsive nuclear arsenal to discourage aggression and ensure global stability. But there was a catch. Back in 2015, it was impossible to confirm whether the Type 094 had a nuclear-powered weapon on board. China's military was incredibly secretive about their vessel, so the US military began speculating about its existence. But it didn't have to wait for long. Soon after, the United States Department of Defense confirmed that the Type 094 Jin-class SSBN was China's first credible sea-based nuclear deterrent, and it was fitted with state-of-the-art weaponry. Each Type 094 came armed with 12 Zhulong-2s, or simply JL-2 submarine-launched ballistic missiles, or SLBMs. Each JL-2 was 12 meters in length, with a payload of a single 1 megaton nuclear warhead, and it had a maximum range of 4,500 miles or 7,200 kilometers, which meant that if China launched it from near their shores, the JL-2 had the capability to reach some parts of Alaska. This changed drastically in 2022. With time came more technological advancement, and while China was continuing to carve itself into a healthy economy, it was also focused on improving both the range and the destructive capabilities of its next generation of Zhulong SLBMs. This led to the creation of the JL-3, taking center stage in its fleet of Type 094 nuclear-powered submarines. These SLBMs had a much longer range, somewhere around the 6,200-mile mark, or 10,000 kilometers. In March 2022, after learning about the new and improved SLBM, the head of the US Strategic Command told the Senate Armed Services Committee that if China sent a well-aimed JL-3 from the China South Sea, it would be able to hit the continental United States. And China has its 6 Type 094 constantly patrolling from Hainan Island into the South China Sea, adding pressure on the United States and its allies. Each Type 094 submarine comes equipped with 12 missile launchers, and since there are 6 of them, the People's Navy has access to 72 JL-3s at any given time. Here's what makes battling a JL-3 SLBM much more complicated. The National Air and Space Intelligence Center reported in 2020 that the JL-3 can carry more than 1 nuclear warhead. The JL-2 could only carry 1 at a time, and this allows China a strategic advantage because a system like that is called a Multiple Independently Targetable Re-entry Vehicle, or MIRV. In simple words, it means that if a JL-3 was launched at the United States, it would break off into 3 independent warheads, which would then target 3 different areas to hit. If China launched an attack on the Alaska-based US Missile Defense Forces, for example, then they'd have to intercept multiple incoming warheads, which would make defense incredibly difficult. But there's an additional question when talking about SLBMs with a range of nearly 6,200 miles. Could China hit further than Alaska? The answer is yes. If China's nuclear-powered submarines change their patrols to include the Bay of Bohai, then most of North and South Dakota, Montana, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, California, and Utah would be in range of the JL-3s. And if the Chinese submarines wanted to target the rest of America, that would also be possible. But this would mean that the Chinese submarine would need to move into the Western Pacific, much farther than Japan and Taiwan, and this would lead them into troubled waters, because the Chinese naval and air forces wouldn't be able to protect them from the United States anti-submarine forces. The Type 094s may boast long-range ballistic missiles fitted with multiple nuclear warheads, but they have a shocking weakness, something you'd never expect. They're loud, louder than most US Navy submarines. In fact, experts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or the CSIS, drew up an analysis in 2021, which found that the Type 094 submarines are 2 times louder than US submarines, and as a result, are more easily detected. In 2009, the US Office of Naval Intelligence made an assessment of the Type 094 submarine and determined that the Chinese submarine was relatively noisy and much easier to detect than Soviet-era SSBNs from the late 1970s. However, the People's Navy has been working on improving their submarines continuously, and new reports suggest that a new challenger might be on the horizon. The Type 096 submarine. While the Type 096 SSBN is not currently active, the People's Navy is fast-tracking its development as we speak. The submarine, which has a NATO-designed name of Tang class, is expected to begin construction at the start of the 2020s. One of the People's Navy main priorities is to modernize its submarine force by using better hull designs and reducing its overall acoustic signature. but the growth has to be modest. The People's Navy is also focusing on maturing its force, expanding its shipyards to make room for more subs and naval vessels, and integrating new technologies into its operations. However, the Type 096's main attraction is its highly capable weapon system, which will be armed with the new and improved JL-3s as nuclear deterrents. And it's important to keep in mind that the JL-3's maximum range reaches up to 6,200 miles. The reason this is important is because of the US Department of Defense's report on the People's Navy's ever-growing naval arsenal. In a 2022 report, the Department of Defense concluded that China will choose to operate its Jin-class Type 094 submarines and the new Type 096 Tang-class submarines simultaneously. This is based on the fact that China's first generation of SSNs, the Type 091 nuclear-powered attack submarine, had a service life of 30+ years. And over the last 20 years, the Chinese government has strived to ensure they continue improving and maturing its second and third generation of submarines, including the Type 094 SSBNs. Since their service lives have been improved, the Type 094 will have the capabilities to run alongside the new Type 096 submarines. And since the People's Navy has addressed the JL-2's limited range with the improved JL-3, both of them will be armed with the long-range JL-3s to showcase China's naval superiority. And it's important to note that if the Type 096 comes into operation, then it will be far stealthier and dive to greater depths than the Type 094. This means one thing: survivability, to ensure that their SSBNs remain safe as well as launch SLBMs at their enemies. The Department of Defense estimates that the People's Navy will run bastion operations. A bastion operation refers to a Navy's defensive strategy. The Navy operates its submarines in a specific and well-protected region known as a bastion, to make sure that the submarines avoid detection, survive impending attacks, and safely launch missiles from a hidden location. And since the JL-3 has an extended range, this means that the Type 096 SSBN will be a far more dangerous and more capable nuclear deterrent than anything China has come up with so far. The Department of Defense suggested in the 2022 report that China has two preferred operating areas that it would consider bastions in the context of war: the South China Sea and the Bohai Gulf. These two locations offer enough proximity to potential targets and enemies, while also providing the People's Navy with favorable conditions for its submarine operations. So now the age-old question remains: can China catch up to the United States with its submarine technology? China has spent the better part of 20 years improving its naval capabilities, and sure enough, those improvements led to the creation of the Type 094 SSBN and the JL-3 submarine-launched ballistic missile. But the United States has an ace up its sleeve: the Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines. They are the largest submarines ever built for the US Navy, and come with their own set of perks that might just give them the edge on the Jin-class Type 094s. Earlier, we mentioned that each Type 094 SSBN comes armed with 12 JL-2s, which were then replaced with the JL-3s. Now that might seem concerning from an individual standpoint, but the Ohio-class submarines, in contrast, come armed with 20 Trident 2s. The Trident II is a submarine-launched ballistic missile built by Lockheed Martin and was first deployed in March of 1990. It still remains in service to this day for its immense destructive capabilities. The US Navy currently has 14 Ohio-class SSBNs in service, and each of them has the capacity to carry 24 Trident IIs. However, the Ohio-class submarines can only carry 20 SLBMs at a time, likely due to the United States' compliance with the New START Treaty signed in April of 2010. But even if the 14 submarines carried 20 Trident IIs each, they still outnumber the Jin-class Type 094's ballistic missile capabilities, 280 compared to 72. This difference is stark, and it gives you an inkling of how vast the US Navy's resources really are. And here's the most important bit of information about the Trident II. While the JL-3 can carry up to 3 independent nuclear warheads, the Trident II can carry up to a maximum of 8. However, in practical situations, it'll only carry an average of 4 warheads per missile due to the limitations placed by the New START Treaty. Still, 4 nuclear warheads fitted with a MIRV platform are far more dangerous than 3. And more importantly, the Trident II exceeds the JL-3's range by a significant margin. Since 2017, the US Navy has been updating the Trident II's design and capabilities to extend their lives as well as their range. Currently, it has a range of approximately 7,480 miles or nearly 12,000 kilometers, far beyond the 6,200-mile range of the JL-3s. Hans Christensen, the director of the Nuclear Information Project at the Federation of American Scientists, says that the Type 094's capabilities, while impressive, are still not good enough due to its loud acoustic signature. Loudness is a submarine's kryptonite. The Type 094 can't travel farther than its shores without being detected by the United States anti-submarine weapons systems. Hans says that a longer-range ballistic missile seems like a good idea, but it's not enough to cover the continental United States. What's more, if China wanted to target the US by traveling far into the Pacific Ocean, it would meet significant challenges. The United States has covered the Pacific Ocean with anti-submarine defenses, meaning that the Type 094 can only operate comfortably on the South China Sea and the Bohai Gulf, its home territory. On the other hand, the upcoming Type 096 Tang-class SSBNs are expected to overcome their predecessors' design flaws and have a much quieter operating sound signature. But the United States Navy isn't far behind. They've already begun construction on the next generation of nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, calling it the Columbia class of SSBNs. These will eventually replace the Ohio-class submarines, and the first one is expected to enter service by the year 2031. The United States Navy has planned for 12 Columbia-class submarines, and each unit is expected to cost a whopping $9.15 billion US, for a total of approximately $109.8 billion, while the Ohio class of subs will be decommissioned and phased out at the rate of one per year beginning in the year 2027. The Columbia class of SSBNs will be much larger, more advanced and quieter than their Ohio class counterparts. But the most notable thing about them is that they'll carry significantly fewer submarine-launched ballistic missiles than the Ohio class. The Columbia class subs will have a maximum capacity of 16 missiles per unit, and this might seem counterintuitive, but it has a purpose. The US military estimates that 16 missile launch tubes are more than enough to meet current nuclear deterrent requirements, and since 12 Columbia-class subs will eventually be in service, this means that the US Navy will have up to 192 SLBMs at their disposal, which is still significantly higher than the 72 JLs of the People's Navy Type 094 SSBNs. Lastly, the Columbia class will have an X-factor. In literal terms, this means that the US Navy has opted for an X-shaped rudder design rather than the cross-shaped design of the Ohio class. This is in a bid to reduce the submarine's acoustic signature. The X-shaped design reduces drag as well as the negative interaction between the propulsor and the rudders, making it more silent and more efficient. And to make it even more stealthy, the Columbia vessels will run on an electric drive, which means that they will use an electric motor to turn its propellers instead of the mechanical drive systems and reduction gears used on earlier nuclear-powered submarines. While China is plowing ahead with the new and improved Type 096 SSBNs, Hans Christensen says that the United States will continue widening the gap between their naval capabilities and those of China's. Dr. Tong Zhao, a senior fellow of the Nuclear Policy Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, believes that China is still far behind the United States in terms of technical marine expertise. Even if they craft a state-of-the-art ballistic missile submarine that is more capable than the previous generation, they still likely won't catch up to the might of the United States Navy anytime soon in the next 2 or 3 decades. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like and subscribe button and tap the notification bell for more videos just like this one.